All right, we're set to go. All right, so now we're going to do demo. I usually do it with a simple polyplane and sphere, but I'm going to do it with one of the files that we're going to do for exercise or for project 2. But this slide's pretty good just to give you an idea of what the icons look like and what they're for. All right, so upper left corner, that is your distant light. Sometimes called a directional light, sometimes called an infinite light. That is the sun. How do you know? Parallel arrows tell you parallel light rays. That is equivalent to an infinite wall of light in whatever direction those arrows are pointing. All right, sphere, upper right, equivalent to bare light bulb. It's an omnidirectional light. It shines in all directions. Down here, bottom left, that is a disk light. Disk light, rectangle light, they are the same family. The only difference is the shape of the light itself. Other than that, they are pretty much identical. Having said that, we use the disk light not just for a broad surface of light like an open door, a window. We also use the disk light here for a spotlight because we can create, out of this disk light, there are settings in there where we can make it have a cone, just like a flashlight or car headlights, and an edge to the cone called edge or cone softness. So think of a cone. I'm going to shine my flashlight here on the board. Cone is the circle. So we can definitely take that light, focus the light to a circle, an ellipse, depending on the angle of the light. We can soften the edge of it, and we can also make it so that the light is bright in the middle and gradually gets less intense toward the edges. Things that all behave in the real world naturally. In CG, we have to make everything happen. All right, so before I actually get in and work with the lights, let's just kind of define what you guys are going to be doing today. All right, so project 2, again, light direction. That's the first thing. 5 key properties of light. Light direction, light intensity, color, and then light contrast, hardness. I like to group those into the shadow. Shadow hardness, shadow softness. And this is all in how they react to a diffuse material. So we supply you guys with the scenes, with the compositions, basically kind of the same thing you had last time. The only difference is you are actually, in addition to adding light, you're also going to be making sure that the objects in the scene have the Pixar surface material assigned to them. And I'll go over how to do that. For this, IPR is going to rule. You're going to be able to use that to figure out the position of your light, the contrast of your shadow, whether it's soft, whether it's hard, and also anything else you need before you kick off a final render. Your renders are going to take much less time than they did with the first scene. For one thing, they're not environments. Second, there's a single light source. Couple objects, environment smaller, your renders should be under 5 minutes. Even with batch rendering, high quality. All right, so we've got it broken down into 4 different exercises, one for each light type. And I've broken down the directions of the light, so every light's going to have a different direction. But it's your choice. You're going to choose which one you want to do. So for example, the rectangle light, you've got 2 choices. You can either do a front light or a top light. You are not only matching light direction, light intensity, but also color. Warm versus cool, cool versus warm, whatever you happen to see. So front light, shadows go away from the camera. They hit the back wall. Exact same scene, exact same light coming from the top. Since it's not parallel light rays, the shadows don't all stay under the object. Notice how they kind of fan out a little bit. Those are things you want to look at. So you're going to choose. Somebody choose one. Doesn't matter. I'm not going to hold you to it. Top left?
Yep.
And you
Top
said
right,
top right?
Top right.
Top light? Okay. So top light. You choose to do top light. That means for your next exercise, down here for the distant light, you need to do front light. Okay? So if you choose to do front light up here for the rectangle, you have to do top light down here for the distant light. All right, so you do top light there. Light's coming from above. There's your clue right there. You get into the distant light. This one is just like the sun. You can also tell, look at the difference in the shadows here. The shadows are more parallel than they were in the rectangle light. So the light's going to behave a little differently. All right, so you're going to do front light here. Now you're going to get down into the sphere, and you're going to choose whether you want to do side light or backlight. But keep in mind that whichever one you choose here, you're going to have to do the opposite one for the disc light or the spotlight. So somebody pick one for the sphere. Back. All right, so if you choose backlight, you need to do side light down here for the spotlight. Now, spotlight, not only do you have to worry about direction, you have to worry about intensity and color, you also have to worry about this cone as well. But don't let that blind you. The first thing you have to do is get the direction of the light. Match your shadows first. Forget there's a spotlight there. Forget there's a cone. Forget all that stuff. If you match these shadows and get the right direction, when you add the cone, it's just going to contract the light and focus it more. And how much you contract it or focus it or make the cone smaller, that's where it's going to lay inside your scene here. Does that make sense? So don't be blinded by, there's too many things to do, I can't do it all at once. Yes, you can. Get the direction first. Get the intensity. Color if there is any, then adjust the cone size, whether it's big or whether it's small. And then adjust how soft the edges are to the cone. That'll make a lot more sense when we actually use the light. You'll see what I mean by cone edge. Because it comes in razor sharp, and it's completely independent of shadows. It's got nothing to do with shadows. All right, does that make sense so far? Now, you'll notice there's a difference. The first three exercises had one scene file. This one is completely different. All right, so there is a separate scene file for this one. Don't forget, you're going to be delivering your final Maya scene for each part of the exercise. So when you're done with the rectangle light, save your Maya scene out. Give it a name, rectangle light, so you know that contains the rectangle light. Then start work on the next light using the same scene file. Now I'm going to show you a couple of workflow tips that you can apply along the way. Where you can have a master scene with multiple lights, you just throw them on display layers, turn the layers off and on. It's just like turning lights off and on. You guys know about display layers for modeling, right? Do the same thing with lights. Select the light, make a new display layer. You can turn visibility off and on. This way you can go back and forth between lights if you need to adjust something. Now, when you're all done with those 4 exercises, you we'll go find some reference and create an exercise of your own. Using one of the two scenes we have, you guys will make your own lights. The only thing you can't do is model anything or use more than one light. The color, the intensity, the light, the position, the arrangement of the geometry inside the scene, that's all you. You can duplicate, you can scale, you can rotate, you can pretty much do almost anything other than model. So I recommend try searching for film noir images as a reference only because it uses a single light source. But if you find something else that isn't film noir that you think you can do with a single light source, give it a shot. If it doesn't work, just be prepared to walk away from it and find something else. So create a new camera, frame up your shot, do the same thing you did for the first project. Frame up your shot, check your focal length, put the resolution gate on if you want to. If you need to, it makes it a lot easier. And go for it. All right, yes?
Like old black and white movies work, like Casablanca and stuff?
Yep, it would. You just have to watch Casablanca. I know the movie well. I like it. There are shots in there that are pretty bright, and so you want to be careful of what you're trying to mimic in there. But yeah, anything is fair game if you think you can do it. Here's a couple examples. I'll show you some stuff of what students have done in the past. So, got the camera angle good. They got the look and feel of backlight. That's pretty much what this is. You know, it works. Parallel light rays. It's going to be your sun, pretty much. What kind of light is that? Spotlight, absolutely. You can tell by the round circular shape and the cone on it. And by the way, we don't advocate smoking, but it's in every film noir movie ever made. In modern film noir, have vape in there. All right, a little bit of backlight. You know, again, just getting the look and feel of it. A couple more shapes in there than really is necessary, but you kind of get the idea. Very simple, but effective. Could have used a little more light in the back behind the subject, but, you know, all in all, not bad. You guys get the idea for that? So, have fun. And if I run across something that you guys did that's really good, I always save it for the next class. So you can be famous. We've also started posting on Discord. I don't know if anybody's checked our Discord channel, but we have a channel in there that's best of student work. And we just love putting up like all the my comp things you guys do, because there's a lot of good stuff up there. So we've been putting them in there. We haven't put up last month yet, but we're going to start putting up every month the best of the stuff that comes out. All right. So any questions so far? One other thing, if there's any questions about what you need to deliver to us, don't forget down here at the bottom, we've got like a screenshot of what your folder and all the content should look like. All right, so you want to download the Project2 file, which I magically have downloaded already, right here. So inside, let me hide all of the stuff before, there we go. All right, so you get two scene files. Whenever it says area, dir, point, that is your rectangle light, your directional light, that's your sun, and your point light, that's your sphere light. And then down here it says spot, that's going to be your disk light. Templates, we give you a separate template for each light type because there's going to be two references for each light because you have a choice. Just like with the first project, make sure you choose the correct reference to be in the top of your template. That's all down here in the render layer. You just make sure you turn on the appropriate reference or turn off. All right, reference images. This time we break your images down for you individually so you can bring these into the image tool. Now, when you're in Maya and you want to bring an image in, so first off, let me bring up the image tool. Now, if you want to bring up the image tool without actually rendering anything, this icon, it looks like a clapper with a giant eyeball, scary eyeball from Monsters, Inc., that's right here. That should launch your image tool. Right now it's empty. If you want to bring reference images in, you go to File, Open File, and navigate to where you have your reference images. So we give you this whole big packet. The reference images are here. You just choose the image you want to bring in. Click Open. There you go. Now when you render, it will create a new entry in the catalog and you'll be able to compare just by clicking back and forth. Make sense? That way you can see, how do my shadows line up with the reference? Really valuable. And also, you want to be working in IPR. This way it's always updating, so as you're adjusting the position of the light, you can see it update. You can get an idea of where all your stuff should be. Does that make sense? Questions? All right. So let's just jump in. Let's see what these lights are made of. Nice thing about this is you're not going to blind yourself or burn your fingers. Anybody here ever do stage lighting in like high school or anything? Yeah, burn yourself. Yep, blind yourself. Yep, there you go. You're not going to do that here, fortunately. Yeah, man. Oh, lights are hot. You don't realize how hot they are until you actually have to work with them. And how heavy they are until you have to pick them up and move them.
When moisture gets on them and they explode.
Oh, yeah, moisture gets on. Well, usually stage lights you take care of. You try not to have that happen. What was that? Yeah. How could you not like that? All right, so let's see. I got Maya launched already. I'm going to set my project. Remember, always set project. If you think you set it, check it again. Not because you're paranoid, because they are out to get you, and they being Maya. All right, so I'm going to open up and just go with the general scene here, the area, directional point, light position. Just going to open that up. Take a look at what we got. So by default, it's going to pop right into the render cam in wireframe. Now, to give you an idea, I'm just going to go out here and go to perspective. And there we are. Basically, Stonehenge in a bowl. So I'm going to go hit 5 on the keyboard. You'll notice that my camera can see through the side of the bowl, but when you're inside the bowl, you can't see out. It's magic. So just turn single-sided display on, that's all. Now, each object in here has Lambert assigned to it. Ooh. We're not going to be using Lambert for anything. So what you want to do is, as soon as you start working on something, you want to change, well, just open the scene up and assign Pixar surface. Right, so easy way to do that, if you go into your outliner, there's the group, there's the small bowl. You can shift select in the outliner. Quite frankly, you can pretty much do the same thing out here. Stop doing that. In the viewport, just marquee everything except the camera. And then go up to this little Pixar surface Luxo star, right click and choose the first one. We are not doing the layered surface, just Pixar surface. Now, when you assign a Pixar surface to it, notice how dark it is. That's because Pixar by default has a very dark value setting on the diffuse part of the material. And where you can close primary specular because we're not even going to play with that. So diffuse color, click once on the color swatch button, go down to value and change your value to 0.5. That is 50% gray. If you do this, you're pretty much a third of the way there. One thing I suggest is once you get rolling, save your scene. All right, so which light should we do first? The rectangle light, the distant light, or the sphere light? Rectangle, let's do rectangle. I like that. All right, so I'm just going to rename this 1903. Oops, my E got really big. There we go. So I'm going to hit save. There we go. All right, so rectangle light first. So right now, if I bring up the, let's bring up the image tool, and I'm going to render, I'm going to do a quick render from the render cam. Uh-oh, I got an error at the bottom. Yes?
Hey, sorry to hold you up. How did you change the color again? I'm just trying to find the button. I couldn't find it.
You assigned Pixar surface to everything, right?
Yes.
In the Pixar surface attributes, the diffuse color, you click the color swatch once. You find it? Pixar surface, go into the attributes. Under diffuse color, you have to click the color swatch.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Click it, go down, change your value to 0.5. I mean, you could sort of guesstimate it by using the slider, but that's not very accurate. You get it?
You said the volume to 0.5?
Value, yes.
Yeah.
Value at 0.5. Should make everything a lot brighter.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep. Anybody else? Yes.
You mentioned the single second display.
Yeah.
Where is that at?
That's basically under the shape node of the surface. Like when you guys model stuff, you get a shape node. Shape node contains all the transform stuff. So you go into the outliner, go under display, or actually wait, not display. Oh wait, is it display? Oh, that's not even my shape node. There we go. Yeah, it's under render stats. It's double-sided on. You can't see through it here. but with double-sided turned off, it only displays where the normals are pointing. Like it's an inner and an outer surface, and you just turn one of them off. Basically, does that make sense? So it should be on by default, but if you're looking to do that for your stuff, it's a good way to get a camera into a weird position, like in a wall or something, and just turn turn that double-sided on the wall off, and then you can see through it. All right. So here we go. Now, when I tried to render, I got an error. Why did I get that error?
You gotta press the R logo thing first.
You mean up here?
Yeah.
Let's try that. Okay, well that worked. But why didn't it work when I went to render from the render cam? Oh, now it did. All right, so I will give you guys a little clue as to what happened. The first time I clicked the render button, RenderMan was not set as my default renderer. What happens though with RenderMan is it's very, let's call it invasive, and it knows that it should be the renderer of choice. So what it does is the second time you hit the render button, it fixes itself. But if you guys get this error, now Pixar may fix that in the future. The reason I'm mentioning it is because if you run into that, just go up into your render settings and just choose the right renderer in your drop down. Like that first menu or that first error message said that it couldn't find the render view. It didn't understand what the RenderMan image tool was because it was expecting Maya software. Does that make sense? So if that happens, just open up your render settings. Make sure you render using RenderMan. I had it set to default. So it's going to bypass Arnold and do that. Now, did I add any lights? No. So why do I have light on? Where did that come from? Yep, that would be the default light. All right, so default lights, they're really good while you're modeling. You don't want to take the time to put a light in your scene. Default lights are basically a directional light or a distant light attached to the camera. So when you model and render something, it's going to always display the surface you're looking at, the face you're looking at. But not very good when you're actually trying to make your own lighting. So what you want to do is turn it off. So I'm going to go up into my RenderMan menu here, go to Render Settings. In the Common tab, all the way down at the bottom, there are Render Options. And I want to disable or turn off Enable Default Light. So now in theory, when I go to render again, it shouldn't show up. Makes sense? So turn off your default lights so you're not getting phantom lights. Now, here's the theory behind default lights. Default lights are there to help you. Supposedly, when you create a new light, that light is supposed to hide itself automatically. However, having said that, certain versions of Maya, like every other version, it's broken. And your default lights stay on even when you make your own light. So always check default lights. Make sure they're off. Bottom line. Or if you render and you're getting weird results, it's like, I got two lights, two sets of shadows. I got a single light in here. What's going on? Default lights. Turn it off. Now you're all set to go. So let me stop that. Close my render settings. Now I'm set. We're doing rectangle first. So all the lights that we're going to be dealing with today are available in the first set of light icons on the left. So you got your render stuff, you got your render settings, or I'm sorry, your image tool stuff, local queue. Here is your light icon. You want to right click and you will see a selection of lights you can use. There's rectangle, there's disk, distant, which is the sun, sphere, cylinder. I don't show cylinder because it's sort of like, well, you can pretty much do the same thing with any other light. Plus, we're going to get into what are called mesh lights later on, and the cylinder light is going to be laughable compared to them, actually. So anything you would have used for a cylinder light, you can pretty much use a modeled surface, select it, make it into a special light, and it will illuminate surfaces. Done. You don't have to have a cylinder light. So while it's fun, it's a cylinder, yay, but it's not going to be that useful. These are the 4 basic lights that are available in almost every software package. You're going to have some kind of point light, you're going to have some kind of sunlight, you're going to have some kind of area light, and some kind of spotlight. And that's why we focus on just these 4. Everything else we can make. All right, so rectangle light, that's the first one. I'm going to select it. And I'm going to kick off IPR so I can see what happens in real time. Now, right now I'm not matching any reference or anything. I'm just trying to figure out how these lights work. So there we go. All right, so there it is right there. Now there's also that default light that's driving me crazy down there. I'm going to hide that default light. To hide something, Control H. There we go. Go away. All right, so what's happening with my rectangle light is it's embedded in the surface in the default position, right? That's why I'm only getting a little sliver of light here. So what I'm going to do is select it and pull it up out of the ground. I'm just going to translate it up. There we go. So you're going to notice that by default, it's not going to be very bright. And that's something you need to get used to with Pixar lights. Pixar lights are going to require a lot of energy like real world lights do. Now, the nice thing about this light is that I can translate it, I can rotate it, I can scale it in any position I want. Now, you guys, did Frank teach you guys how to keep the image tool on top of Maya the whole time while you work? Because you notice it disappears, like if you click off of it, it'll hide itself somewhere. If you go to the window in the image tool, down at the bottom, window always on top, make sure it's checked on. The shortcut is T. And sometimes you wind up turning that off and on. So what it should do is keep itself on the top all the time. That way you can kind of move it around, work in the viewport if you want to. All right, so it's not doing a good job right now. All right, so I'm going to rotate this. So I rotate it down. I can translate it up again. You guys know about cycling through available programs you have while you're working? If you do Command Tab, if you do Command hit Tab, hold Command down, it'll show you all the open apps you have going on. And you can just tab through it just by keeping Command held down, just using the tab key. You can cycle through all your different apps that you have. So I can switch back and forth between Maya if I want to and the image tool. Or if I'm looking at reference, I can go to the desktop to the Finder, find something, and go back. All right. So rectangle light, first thing you'll notice, very dim. To make it brighter, you can drag the slider, but the slider goes only to 2. So I don't bother with the slider at all. In fact, what I will do is basically, let me reset this pan zoom. There we go. So what I do is I type numbers in. It's a lot quicker. So if I want to double the intensity, double the energy, I just type in whatever number I have. You can see as I start to double it, it's starting to get brighter. So there's your intensity. I'm going to go back to 1 for now, just to kind of show you a couple of things. So exposure works just like a camera. It basically multiplies whatever number you have in the intensity. So at 0, it's using 1 in the intensity. If I turn it to 1, 1 times 1, it's still 1. But it's going to start to double itself as I change numbers. We generally, in fact, I'll basically never show you anything about exposure, only because I want you to get used to the intensity values in the lights themselves. Now, exposure is really good if you've got more than one light in your scene. You have everything balanced, it looks great, but your boss says, hey, guess what? It needs to be twice as bright, or it's too bright. It needs to be less intense. Exposure, you can cut the exposure in half on all your lights and have them all come down. Or you can double the exposure and have it all get brighter. It's a real good way to be precise with values like that. But as far as individual lights, work with intensity. Make sense? All right. So here's something I want to show you before I get into color or I do anything else. So we talked about big light, small light, right? If I scale my light up like this, it gets brighter. But it makes really soft shadows. If I want hard shadows, I scale my light smaller, the shadows get harder, but what happens to my light? It gets darker, right? Sort of a nice feature, but in the real application of this, I want to have a separate control for my brightness and a separate control so I can make my shadows hard and soft. In the Pixar lights, you have to go down under Advanced and turn on a feature called Normalize. Normalize means that you can scale your light to any size you want, but it will not affect the intensity. Your intensity is now entirely separate from the size of the light. So when I turn that on, and now I scale my light really big, it just basically softened my light without making it darker. Other than like the hot spot that I'm really close to right here is getting brighter because of the light. But I now have a separate intensity control. All right, so you're going to notice you need a lot of intensity to really get anything to look good. Also notice that the area light, or the rectangle light, does not illuminate anything behind it. All right, so there are my shadows. So I say, shadows, they're too soft. No problem. I can scale it. My shadows will get harder. And my scene will not get darker. So, small light, look at the shadows. I'm going to stop my render, scale up my light, and restart my render so I can compare. Soft shadows. Hard shadows, soft shadows. Light's in the same position. The only thing I've done is scale the light to make it hard and soft. Does that make sense? Yes.
So what was the one you pressed in the advanced settings?
Normalize. You're pretty much going to want to do that with any light you want to scale in RenderMan. Because you want to have that whole soft shadow, light intensity thing separate. The only light it's not going to matter on is the distant light. You can't scale that because it is an infinite light. It's the sun. Everything's in your light attributes. There's your light intensity. I was under the basic section before, but if you scroll down to advanced, normalize is there. Yeah, when you guys are adjusting lights, you're pretty much going to be living in the light attributes. All right, so there we go. Scale this down a little more. Just so I get a little definition on the shadows. I'm just playing around. You're going to use whatever you want for that. Yep. That's the whole idea behind that. Yeah.
So when you do normalize, I see the makes it dark, but let's say I have the white lighting, I just want to make the shadows sharper. And if you normalize it, it makes it darker. So
Well,
intensify my,
what I would advise is before you start lighting, you turn normalize on. That way you scale and you control shadows completely separate. That way you're working with the 5 principles of light. You know, you got direction, you got intensity, you got color, and you got the shadow contrast. Theoretically, yes, you can do it all by scale and everything, but it's going to be a lot of guesswork. All right, so color. Right here in the color swatch under basic lights. One thing you will find is that light saturates very quickly. That either looks like a photographer's development studio or a red light district. All right, so when you go to add color, you are going to be desaturating it. Saturation is the dominance of your color. So you know Maya is based on hue saturation value, right? Hue is the color, saturation the dominance of the color, and value the lightness and darkness of the color. So here I can take saturation and start to drop it down. Now it's not quite so cartoony. Now it's becoming a little more subtle. So now it's kind of a very, very light pink. I want orange? No problem. I can just change my hue. I want cool? No problem. There you go. Got that kind of eerie hospital green you see in every zombie game and flick that's around. And you got cooler light. So chances are, and this is usually kind of my rule of thumb, I'm going to start with my saturation in light color about halfway, and then I can go up or down from there. But I just know automatically that's way too much. Very few reference images are you going to find with that much light saturation in it. All right, so light intensity, light direction, light intensity, light color. Don't forget the normalize button. Make sense? Questions? All right. One other trick I want to show you guys. So I can translate, I can rotate, I can scale this light. I can also use what's called the interactive manipulator, which will give me kind of a little locator that the light can always point to. I can move that locator around and the light will follow it. For me to do that, I need to be in the viewport with my light selected, and I have to hit the T key, T for tango, on the keyboard. There is basically my little manipulator. And now I can just drag that around and notice my light will point to it wherever I go. It's like having a dog on a leash. All right, so I'm going to stop my IPR because it looks like it's really getting weird there. It's not even matching my light. Right, so by the way, I put this light directly overhead. Well, sort of overhead. Yes? You want to make sure you're using, now for one thing you have to use IPR because if you do the R button, it's going to render and it's not interactive. So you have to use IPR, but you have to right click on it, go to camera, and select the render cam. And that way I can always be assured that it's going to render and I can make updates into perspective. Do you find it? Okay, good. All right, so for example, let me go into my image tool, and this is a rectangle. Let's go top. What do we got here? Top light. So there's my top light. How's my shadows? Yeah, they're a little off. Well, I'm looking here at this little shadow flipping back and forth on the peg in the back, and you can see the other shadows in the back too. They're kind of going. Right, so let me see, the render cam is right here. If my shadows go too far to the left, what do I need to do to my light? Yep, I have to go bring it in the opposite direction. Remember, it's going to be opposite the shadows. So what I want to do is let's try and bring this over this way a little bit. Well, let me undo that and kick off IPR again. Because I always want to make these adjustments while it's working. There we go. Popped it over a little bit. It's better. No. All right, much better. Now they're too long. If my shadows are too long, what do I have to do to my light? No, shadows are too long. Yep, raise it up. Don't forget, it's just like a real light in the real world. So if my shadows are too low, the shadows are going to be long. If I want them shorter, the light's got to come up. Perfect. So if I look at my image tool, I can see compared to my reference, the shadows are roughly in the right position. They're a little off, but my light needs to come a little more overhead. So that's here. Much closer. Now, still needs work, but I'm not going to spend the time to do that. You guys get the idea? So next I would do is my position's decent, work on intensity, get the color. Here's something you can do. If you find you're getting frustrated, you can't quite nail the direction, do it in passes. Like do the direction of the shadow, work on the intensity, work on the color, then go back to the shadow. Don't try to do them all at once. Do one thing at a time, let it render. That way you don't do too many things you can't figure out which one worked, which one didn't work, what did I do. Now, here's the downside to using that interactive manipulator. Once I deselect it, guess what happens? It loses its position. It doesn't go all the way down to the floor where I had it. It's kind of a pain, but the light is still aimed in the right position. It sort of still has a manipulator, just not as long. It's something I hope Pixar fixes, because that would be really nice. I'd like to keep my center aim point the same, but it's a bug. What are you going to do? All right, questions? Yes? You hit the T key. You have to select the light. So if I want to get out of there, say I don't want the aim point anymore, I just hit either W, E, or R, translate, rotate, scale. So now, if I want to get it back, I hit T again. I'm just doing default. Now, if I want to get quick, since this is a pretty simple scene, a lot of times you will see me take the IPR samples down to 32, but this is a pretty light scene, so it doesn't really take that long. Besides, I can stop it at any time. A lot of times I will knock it down to 32, though. But like I said, you can stop it at any time, and it will finish its pass, and then you're done. All right, questions? Make sense? All right, which light do you want to see next? Sphere? All right, that sounds like fun. Now, what I want to do is I want to take my light. I don't want to delete it. I want to throw it on a display layer so I can save it in case I want to come back to it. So I'm going to go into my channel box layer editor with my light selected, create a new blank layer, rename it rectangle light layer. Don't forget that you need to make sure that you use underscores because Maya hates spaces. So hit save. Now what I can do is turn off visibility, and now that's just like turning the light switch off. All right, so sphere light. I'm going to go up into my happy light setup here. Going to go to sphere. It's going to drop in at the center of the world. I'm going to kick off an IPR render. Yeah?
Hey, since they're just shapes, there's not that much detail for the maximum sampling. Should it be at 128? That should be fine.
No, well, that's up to you to match the reference. The reference is the render quality we expect. In addition to, here's the direction of your light, the intensity, the color, the shadow. So just make sure that it's noise free. Make sure you batch render at the very end. But yeah, your samples may be less than the first project, definitely. All right, so there is my sphere light. All right, so I can pull it up out of the ground. There we go. All right, so with the sphere light, does it matter if I rotate it? No. Well, you can, but it's a sphere and it's going to still stay the same no matter how you rotate it. So the thing that's really going to matter with the sphere light is the position of it, translation, and scale. Again, same thing with the rectangle light. Guess what happens if I scale this? It gets brighter. Make it smaller, it gets less intense. So I can fix this exactly the same way that I fixed the same issue with the rectangle light, which is normalize. Where do I find that? I got amnesia.
It is in the attributes editor.
Attributes, yep.
Shape area. And it's under
Advanced. First button. There we go. So now I can scale this as much as I want. Well, not that much, but. And it would help if I could see, so I need to add a little more energy in here. There we go. Yeah, let's make it really bright. No, I said really bright. There we go. Well, better. It's brighter. There we go. All right. All right, so what are my choices for the sphere light? Anybody remember? All right, we got side and we got back. So side light, that's probably going to look something like this off to the side. How do I know? Well, shadows and reference. But before I even get into matching light position and all that stuff, let's just go over what the light actually does. So you basically have the same principles. You've got intensity, you've got color, normalize when you want to scale the light. So if I want harder shadows, smaller light. All right, color, exactly the same thing. Now, if you want to get rid of color in your light, instead of clicking on the color swatch, you can grab the slider that's next to the color, drag it left and right, and you'll reset it back to black and white. Oh, one thing you don't want to really do is do that to a light, because you're basically introducing value into the color of the light, which makes you think the intensity is not as bright. So if you need to do that, do it with this. Do it with intensity. Make sense? All right, questions about that? I mean, it's really a pretty simple light. Yes?
If we were to batch render, are we supposed to see what the shades that we see through or the entire bowl? Because that's kind of what I know.
Did you set your render cam in your render settings? So go into your render settings, under common, that's going to tell you which camera you're rendering from. You got to choose the render cam. Because remember, Maya's always going to want to render from perspective. That's its favorite camera. So anytime you guys don't get the results you want, especially as far as a camera, double check that you don't have multiple cameras, because there's something else that'll kill a batch render. You'll get two sets of renders, one with the perspective camera, one with the other, and it's just a waste of time. Or you're just getting perspective outright. Good question, though. Any others?
What happens if the render comes out like with the background all muddy?
All muddy looking. Not sure what you mean. Show me.
Like, well, this is a different one, but see how the background is kind of spotty.
That's because you don't have enough samples. That would, well, depends on what do you have in your settings. This is where you need to experiment. Like, remember we gave you, if it comes out splotchy like that, check your max samples. If they're low, go power of 2, double them. Check to see if you need to increase the min samples if your max samples are not power of 2 friendly. Remember, some settings have weird numbers with the square root.
Yeah, my min is 32,
Do you have denoise turned on? Then I would say you probably need to check your indirect samples.
It's like 1.
Yeah, you probably want to change that to 2. If you change it to 2, you can probably drop down the max samples for everything to 512. Because it's the indirect that you're doubling and not everything else.
So if that goes to 512, then would that be 16?
No, keep it at 32. 16, you'd actually be lower than you would, because the square root of 512 is like 22 point something. You don't want to ever go lower. It's better to go higher.
Gotcha.
All right. Makes sense. Questions? Any other questions related to lighting, project 2? Yes?
So how did you say you wanted us to think for the like the 4 pictures, we've got to pick the opposite if we pick one of them?
Yeah, here, let me bring this back. So, for example, you've got, for the first 2 lights, you've got a choice of either front light or top light. So, for example, if you pick one in the rectangle light.
Top light?
So if you pick top, you've already done top, you need to do the front light in the next one.
Okay.
So same thing down here, 2 different directions, 2 different lights. So now you got side light, you got backlight. You choose which one you want to do the sphere light with. That kind of drives your decision for the disc light. Make sense?
Yeah.
So if you choose backlight for the sphere, you can't do backlight in the spotlight, the disc light. You have to do side light. So in the end, you'll have, each light will be a different light direction. There shouldn't be any repeats. Make sense? Good. All right, any others? All right, so I'm going to throw this onto a layer, a display layer. My sphere light, and let's do the next one. Which one should we do next? Yeah, let's do disc. That's always fun. Save my scene. There we go. Turn visibility off. Good night. All right, disc light. Minimize you. All right, so go back to our Pixar lights. Disc light is the second light. Again, right out of the box, it's going to behave exactly like the rectangle light. The only difference is the shape of the light. So let me kick off IPR again. We'll play around with this a little bit, but you guys should pretty much have a handle on how this works. All right, so you can aim it with the interactive manipulator, just like you did. So for example, let me hit the T key, bring this up out of the ground, change my origin, sort of okay. Same thing, if I scale this light up, what's going to happen? It's going to get brighter. So I want to normalize it, just like I did with the rectangle. So again, all the same controls. Advanced, normalize. Now I can crank this up. So again, if you bring this in, you're not going to have any light behind it. Uh-oh, lost connection. That was go to training. We'll probably reconnect eventually. But don't worry, I'm still recording on ScreenFlow, so that should still work. Alright, so everything else works the same. Intensity, normalized, light color, all that stuff. Here's the spotlight stuff, which is the cool part. Right, so there's my scene. Now, to get to all of the spotlight controls, that is in the Refine section, which is right underneath Basic. So if you expand Basic, you will see things like emission focus tint, specular amount, diffuse amount, intensity near distance, none of which really matter to us. Go away. The thing we're interested in is cone angle, cone softness, and emission focus, but not in that order. The first thing you want to do is adjust cone angle. By default, it's set to 90 degrees, which is theoretically in real 90 degrees, and it looks like the disc is flat. As soon as I start to lower it, notice that it creates this big, giant, looks like an umbrella. And what it's doing is it's making the cone smaller and smaller so that I now have a circle. You guys see that? So now you took this big flat light, made a cone for it, and now we've got a round circle, an ellipse, depending on the angle you have that light aimed at. So now, what I want to do is notice that my shadows are really soft. Your shadow softness is based on the size of your light. It's got nothing to do with the cone or anything. So if I want my shadows to be a little harder, let me scale this light. There we go. It contracted my light a little bit, or my shadows a little bit. There's my cone angle. I can see that. I can make it bigger, make it smaller. Now, if I want to adjust the edge of my cone, let me shrink this down a little bit more just so we can see. There we go. All right, so even though these objects outside the cone are not in direct light, they still get a little bit of light. That's global illumination. It's basically bouncing off the stuff in the circle to all the shapes around it. Now, I want to make the cone softer. I just turn up softness. When you turn it up, it will make the cone size basically smaller. So this is also in degrees, so if I hit 5 here, it's going to contract a whole lot. And basically it just goes from 0 to 1. So notice I hit 5 and it just went to 1, the max. So you add a little bit of softness on the edge of it. How much is going to be based off your reference, like how soft is the edge? But what you're interested in is the actual size of the cone first. Then the softness of it. Now, inside the cone itself, it's even intensity throughout the whole cone. So this area over here is just as bright as this area over here. It's bright in the middle, it's bright towards the edges. If I want that to change, I can basically adjust what's called the emission focus, which will keep it bright at the center but gradually make it less intense toward the edges. So when I turn this up, notice it stays bright in the middle, but the edges start to get dark. So here it is, straight up, nothing. Knock it down a little. It stays bright in the middle, but gets less intense toward the edges. Yeah.
I got a question. What is it that you're able to adjust that 70 mile without having the drawer open?
In the image tool, make sure you go up to window and have it always on top. Window always on top. Right, question, does that make sense? So first things first, when you guys go to do the spotlight exercise, get the direction of the shadows first. Get the intensity, get the color, then work on the cone. If you've got the direction of the shadows, your lights should be in the right position, and just making the cone smaller is going to focus the area of light around it. And then adjust the edges of the cone, and then if it has emission focus, which basically you should be able to tell because it'll be bright in the middle and not quite as bright on the edges. Yes? Depends on what kind of light it is. Let's go back to here. So for this one? This one. All right, so for here, that's going to be a combination of position of the light and how close is it to the backdrop. So if your backdrop is really dark, your light probably needs to be closer to it. There, I gave you too much already. I shouldn't have said that. Pretend I didn't say that. I don't remember. I've got amnesia. Right, so last light that we're going to do is going to be distant light. There's your sun. All right, let me throw this onto a layer. That's going to be, I'm going to call it spotlight because that's really what it is. Yes, it is a disc light, but it's got all that spotty goodness in it. All right, so last light, Pixar distant light. It's the only one that is not a solid shape. It's got arrows. Now, you'll notice that the size of that light is hilariously large compared to all the others. It makes this look like a clown car in here. So, let's render this out and see what we get by default. All right, that works well. There you go, project done. So, what's going on? Well, pretty much the light rays right now are parallel to the bottom of the ground. So part of the problem is, let's adjust, can I select this? All right, there we go, got it. All right, so what I want to do is pull this up out of the ground. Is it going to help me? No, because the light rays are still parallel. And remember, it's an infinite wall of light. However, the thing that will matter is when I rotate this down, the direction that all my blocks are in is defined by those parallel shadows. Now, for this light, scaling doesn't matter, because it is an infinite light. It's a wall of light coming in that direction. But it makes it easier to handle the icon if you shrink the icon down. Because right now that's like, you've got like, a 500-pound cooler and you only need like a little handheld igloo. So just scale it. You're not going to change how the light behaves. It's not really going to behave any differently, but it's going to make the icon a little easier to wield. So does translation do anything to this light at all? Nope. It has nothing to do with it. This light, like the real world source, is, well, for us, it looks like the sun, rises and sets, but it's really the earth rotating around it and the rotation of the earth and the position of it. All right, so it's all about rotation. So, if your shadows are too long, you need the light to be more overhead. That's all rotation. If the shadows need to be longer, or if they need to go to one side, good night. There you go. You've just gone through a whole 24-hour cycle. It's the life of a peg in a bowl. It's my new documentary. Okay, so for this light, the shadows are controlled automatically by the direction of the light. Now, those are fairly accurate to the sun's shadows. Sun shadows really are not that soft, except when the sun is really low in the sky and the shadows are super long. So generally, the shadow softness is controlled by angle extent here. But here's the thing, if you adjust that, it's just like adjusting the size of the light. It's going to make it brighter, and you have to normalize it. But with the sun, you don't even have to worry about it. So notice the intensity right away. You get lots of energy. 50,000. Oh yeah, by the way, get used to big numbers. This is closer to like real world energy, rather than just, Maya, where it's like 1, 1.5, 2. Oh, it's too bright. All right, so here, shadows are turned on by default. You don't have to worry about anything. There's really not much going on. If you want to play around with the shadow softness, you have to turn on normalize, because if you adjust this, say for example, if I make that 1, it's way too bright. But what I want to do is normalize it, so that means I can make my shadows harder or softer independent of the intensity. Nope, go away, don't like you. Alright, now the nice thing is, RenderMan set this thing up where you can just left click and default to the default setting. So if you go too far afield, you've completely blown up your sun, it went nova on you. You can either delete it or just left click, change the extent back to where it should be, turn off normalize, life is good. Just pretend it never happened. Alright, color. Yep, you can adjust color here exactly the same way. So here's my hue, here's my saturation, nice warm sunlight, or I'm pretending this is nighttime, it's the moon. Ooh, it's cool now. Right, questions? Anything not clear? So today it's all about playing around with the lights. Get used to them. Figure out how they work. It's going to be well worth it because, like I said, this is the basic toolkit we're going to use for everything else. Now, next lecture, we're going to deal with multiple lights. And you're going to be doing a portrait also. We've got a character with some skin on it. Creepy because it's got eyes closed, looks like a cadaver, but you know, it's a human shape and you can actually get a decent portrait light out of it. All right, so you guys good with what you're doing today? Any questions? All right, good time for a break. So go to lunch, come back at 6 o'clock.